Tonight's story is not just about people from long ago. It is about the heart's eternal questions. What do we owe to those we love? What do we owe to ourselves? And when those two loyalties collide, how do we find our way through the wreckage? Let these questions rest gently in your awareness. You need not answer them. Only listen. Only feel. Only be. In a time when the world was younger and the line between history and myth was thin as morning mist, there stood a kingdom called Camelot. It rose from the green hills of Britain like a dream made of stone and starlight, its towers reaching toward heaven, its halls filled with the greatest knights the world had ever known. At its heart sat King Arthur. Noble and just, a man who believed that honor could heal the wounds of a broken world. Around him gathered the knights of the Round Table, warriors bound not by hierarchy but by equality, by a shared vision of something greater than themselves. Among them walked Lancelot, called by some the greatest knight who ever lived. Raised by the Lady of the Lake in a realm between water and sky, he came to Camelot like a comet, brilliant and unstoppable. In battle, he was without equal. In virtue, he seemed touched by something divine. And in his heart, he carried a love so fierce, so impossible, that it would bring an entire kingdom to its knees. For Lancelot loved Guinevere, and Guinevere was Arthur's queen. This is not a simple story of good and evil. There are no villains here, only people trying to be good and failing in the most human of ways. There is Arthur, who loved them both. Guinevere, trapped between duty and the wild singing of her own heart. And Lancelot, whose very perfection became the crack through which his soul would shatter. What you are about to hear is their story. But perhaps, if you listen closely, you will hear something of your own story too. For we have all stood at the crossroads where love and loyalty diverge. We have all felt the terrible weight of choosing between what we should do and what we long to do. And we have all, in our own ways, paid the price for being human. Let us step back now, into that distant time. Let us walk the halls of Camelot in its golden hour, before the fall, before the sorrow. Let us meet them as they were, in that first trembling moment when everything changed. Chapter 1: The Destined Meeting. Before we enter the hall where their eyes first met, let us pause to consider something we have all experienced, that moment of sudden, inexplicable connection. When a stranger's gaze meets yours across a crowded room, and something in the universe seems to click into place. Psychologists study this phenomenon, this limerence, this lightning strike of attraction. They tell us it is chemistry, neurons firing, evolution's ancient program running its course. The brain releases dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, a cocktail of chemicals that make the world suddenly vivid, that narrow our focus to a single point, a single person, as if they were the answer to every question we have ever asked. But knowing the chemistry does not diminish the magic. It does not make the experience less real, less transformative. If anything, it reminds us that we are creatures woven from both stardust and longing, both reason and wild, aching hope. This is how it began for them, with a glance, with a moment that could not be undone. Lancelot arrived at Camelot on a morning when the world seemed to hold its breath. The mist clung to the valley like a secret, and through it, the castle rose, its banners snapping in the wind like the wings of great birds. He had traveled far. This young knight raised in an otherworld of still waters and whispered enchantments. The Lady of the Lake had taught him everything: how to wield a sword as if it were an extension of his own arm, how to read the stars, how to move through the world with grace and deadly precision. But she had not taught him how to guard his heart. Arthur received him in the great hall, a place of soaring arches and light that fell in golden columns through high windows. The king was younger then, his beard still dark, his eyes still bright with the belief that the world could be remade through courage and compassion. He clasped Lancelot's hand and called him brother before he even knew his name. That was Arthur's way. He saw the best in people and, by seeing it, called it forth. "You are welcome here," Arthur said, his voice warm as summer stone. "Any man who seeks to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, has a place at our table." And Lancelot, who had never known a father, who had been raised by magic in a realm of silence and beauty, felt something crack open in his chest. Loyalty, instant and absolute, bloomed there like a flower pushing through stone. He would serve this king. He would die for this king. He swore it without words, in the secret language of the soul. That evening, there was a feast. The hall filled with knights and ladies, with music and laughter that rose to the rafters like prayers. Lancelot stood near the wall, still unused to such crowds, such brightness. He watched the firelight dance across the faces of men who would become his brothers in arms. He listened to their stories of battles won and quests undertaken, and he felt, for the first time in his life, that he belonged somewhere. And then the world tilted. She entered the hall like dawn breaking over water, slow and inevitable and impossibly beautiful. Queen Guinevere. Her hair fell in waves of honey and gold, catching the torchlight as she moved. She wore a gown the color of deep forest moss, embroidered with silver thread that shimmered like dewdrops on spider webs. But it was not her beauty that stopped Lancelot's breath, though she was beautiful beyond any ballad's telling. It was something else. Something in the way she held herself, both regal and lonely, like a swan gliding across a still lake, graceful and entirely alone. Their eyes met. In that instant, the noise of the hall became a distant hum, as if someone had placed a glass bell over him and her, sealing them in a world of two. He could not look away. She did not look away. And in that gaze, something passed between them, some recognition that neither could name. It was as if their souls knew each other, had known each other, would always know each other, across any distance, any lifetime. She broke the gaze first, turning to smile at something Arthur said, but her hand rose to her throat, a small, unconscious gesture, as if she too felt the sudden tightness there, the difficulty of breathing in a room that had become, without warning, too small and too large all at once. Lancelot's heart beat like a war drum. His hands, which had never trembled in battle, shook now. He pressed them flat against the cold stone wall behind him, grounding himself, reminding himself where he was. Who he was. A knight. A man of honor. A man who had just sworn, only hours ago, to serve the king who stood beside that woman, laughing, oblivious, trusting. He should leave. He should walk out of this hall, out of this castle, back into the mist from which he came. Some part of him knew, even then, that staying would lead to ruin. That this feeling, this sudden, impossible recognition, was a door he should not open. But he did not leave. Because beneath the fear, beneath the warning bells clanging in his mind, there was something else. Something that felt like destiny. Like the universe had been arranging pieces on a board for 1,000 years, and he and she were finally in the same room, the same moment, the same breath. And so he stayed. And the door, already cracked open, could never be fully closed again. Later, when the feast had ended and the hall emptied, Lancelot stood alone in the courtyard under a sky scattered with stars. The night air was cool against his face, but it did nothing to quench the fire that burned in his chest. He thought of the Lady of the Lake, of her warnings about the world of men, about hearts that could be broken, about desires that could lead a soul astray. Guard yourself, she had said, her voice like water over stones. The greatest danger is never the enemy's sword. It is your own heart, wanting what it should not want. He had not understood then. He understood now. Somewhere above him, in a tower room lit by a single candle, Guinevere stood at her window, looking down at the courtyard where a knight stood alone, his face turned toward the stars. She placed her hand against the cold glass, and she wondered, with a feeling like falling, if it was already too late to stop what had begun. It was. Chapter 2: The Perfect Knight's Mask. There is a particular kind of suffering that belongs to those who strive for perfection. It is a quiet suffering, often invisible to others, because the perfectionist has learned to hide it beneath accomplishment, beneath success, beneath the mask of someone who has it all together. Psychologists call it the impostor syndrome. Though that name does not quite capture the full weight of it, it is the constant fear that you are not enough. That if people truly saw you, truly knew the thoughts you think and the desires you harbor, they would turn away in disappointment or disgust. And so you work harder, strive higher, become more, always more, building the wall between who you are and who you fear you might be. Lancelot became the greatest knight in Camelot. But greatness, as we will see, is both armor and prison. Let us walk with him now, through the years that followed that first meeting. Let us see how a man can be celebrated by the world and haunted by himself, all at once. In the months and years that followed, Lancelot became a legend. Stories of his deeds spread through the kingdom like wildfire through dry grass. He rescued maidens from towers where dragons coiled. He defeated knights who had never known defeat. He rode into enchanted forests and returned with treasures thought lost to time. In tournaments, he was unstoppable, a blur of silver and strength, his lance striking true, his sword singing through the air like a hymn. The people loved him. The other knights respected him, though some, in the privacy of their hearts, felt the small, bitter seed of envy. And Arthur, good Arthur, loved him best of all. He made Lancelot his champion, his right hand, the one he turned to when the kingdom faced its darkest threats. "You are the best of us," Arthur would say, clasping his shoulder after another victory. "The truest embodiment of what a knight should be." And Lancelot would smile and bow his head and accept the praise, even as something inside him withered. Because he knew what no one else could see, that every morning when he knelt in the chapel to pray, his mind was not on God or honor or duty. It was on her, on the way light caught in her hair, on the sound of her laughter drifting through the castle corridors, on the unbearable sweetness of those rare moments when their hands brushed accidentally, and the whole world seemed to stop breathing. He tried to stop it. He tried with everything he had. He volunteered for the most dangerous quests, the ones that took him far from Camelot for months at a time, hoping that distance would cure what ailed him. He prayed until his knees ached and his voice grew hoarse. He fasted. He trained until exhaustion pulled him under like a tide, hoping to find some peace in the darkness of dreamless sleep. But it did not work, because every time he returned, there she would be, standing in the courtyard as the knights rode in, her hand raised in welcome, her eyes finding his across the distance. And in those eyes, he saw something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He saw that she felt it too. This impossible, unspeakable thing. Guinevere, for her part, was equally bound by the chains of duty. She had not chosen Arthur, not really. She had been chosen for him, selected for her beauty and lineage, a piece on the chessboard of royal alliance. Arthur was kind to her. He honored her. He gave her everything a queen could want, except the one thing she did not know she needed until Lancelot arrived. Passion. The feeling of being truly seen. The sense that in someone's eyes, you were not a symbol or a role, but a living, breathing woman with a soul that sang and ached and longed. She never meant to love him. She fought it as fiercely as he did. She filled her days with responsibilities, with the endless tasks of queenship. She worked in the gardens until her hands were stained with soil. She visited the sick. She mediated disputes. She did everything she could to be good, to be worthy of Arthur's trust. But late at night, alone in her chambers, she would stand at the window and look out over the castle grounds. And her heart would search for him like a compass seeking north. And when she found him, a distant figure crossing the courtyard or standing watch on the walls, something in her would settle and unsettle all at once, like a bird finding its branch only to realize it is already broken. This is the insidious nature of forbidden love. It does not announce itself with trumpets. It does not ask permission. It grows in the spaces between words, in glances that last a heartbeat too long, in the careful way two people learn to avoid each other precisely because being near is too dangerous, too revealing. Years passed this way. Lancelot and Guinevere became masters of restraint, of politeness, of the kind of formal courtesy that looks like indifference but is actually the opposite. They learned to be in the same room and never touch, to speak to each other only when necessary and never about anything that mattered. They learned to translate their longing into other languages, his into valor on the battlefield, hers into grace in the court. But repression has a cost. Psychologists understand this well. When we deny a part of ourselves, when we push down what we feel, it does not simply disappear. It goes underground. It pulls in the dark corners of the psyche, gaining pressure, gaining power, until one day it erupts. For Lancelot, the cost showed in small ways that only he noticed. The way his hands shook after he saw her. The nightmares where he fought battles he could not win. The growing sense that he was living a lie, that the man everyone praised did not exist, that he was hollow, a suit of armor with no one inside. He began to understand something terrible, that perfection was not a goal, but a cage. That by becoming what everyone needed him to be, he had lost the ability to be simply himself. And the self he had buried, the one that wanted and needed and ached, was slowly suffocating. One night, after another tournament where he had won every bout, where the crowd had chanted his name until the very stones seemed to vibrate with it, Lancelot returned to his quarters and sat alone in the darkness. His armor lay in pieces around him, and he stared at his hands, these hands that had accomplished so much, and he felt nothing but emptiness. "What am I?" he whispered to the silence. "If I am not who they think I am, then what am I?" The silence had no answer. But somewhere in the castle, Guinevere lay awake in her bed, staring at the canopy above her, asking herself the same question. And the walls they had built, so carefully, so desperately, began, finally, to crack. Chapter 3: The Queen's Solitude. To be seen but not known. To be admired but not understood. To live always in the performance of a role, never able to step off stage, never able to simply be. This is a particular kind of loneliness. One that thrives in crowded rooms, in the center of attention, in the heart of what looks, from the outside, like a perfect life. It is the loneliness of the woman who is told she has everything, even as she slowly realizes she has nothing that truly feeds her soul. Psychologists speak of identity foreclosure, the experience of having your life's path chosen before you are old enough to choose it yourself. For women in Guinevere's time, and in many times since, this was the expected way. You became what your family, your society, your world needed you to be. Your own desires, your own dreams, were at best secondary, at worst irrelevant. But the self, that wild, true self, does not go quietly. It waits. It watches. And when it sees a chance, even a dangerous chance, to finally breathe, to finally live, it reaches for it with both hands. Let us sit with Guinevere now, in her golden cage. Let us understand what it means to be a queen, and yet still, somehow, a prisoner. The queen's chambers were beautiful. Everyone said so. Tapestries woven with scenes of gardens and hunts hung on the walls, their threads catching the light like trapped rainbows. The bed was canopied in silk the color of wine. Fresh flowers stood in silver vases, replaced every morning by servants who moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. And Guinevere felt like she was slowly turning to stone. She woke each morning to the same ritual. Servants dressed her in layers of fine cloth, each garment another piece of the costume she wore. They arranged her hair, pinning and twisting until it became a crown of gold. They painted her lips, her cheeks, making her face into a mask of queenly beauty. And when they were done, she would look at herself in the polished bronze mirror and wonder where she had gone. The girl who once ran barefoot through meadows. The girl who laughed too loud and dreamed too big. Where was she now? Hidden, buried, forgotten. Her days were full, but they were full of nothing. Endless ceremonies where she stood beside Arthur, smiling, waving, playing her part. Meetings with nobles where she was expected to be decorative, not decisive. Hours spent with needle and thread, embroidering flowers that would never wilt, creating beauty that felt meaningless because it served no purpose beyond proving she knew how to be idle gracefully. Arthur was kind. She could not fault him for that. He treated her with respect, with courtesy, with all the proper affection of a husband toward his wife. But there was no fire between them. No moment when their eyes met and the rest of the world disappeared. He loved her, she supposed, the way one loves a precious object, something to be protected and displayed and kept safe. But he did not know her, and she realized, with a sorrow that settled in her bones like winter cold, that he had never tried to. In the evenings, when Arthur was at council or in the hall with his knights, Guinevere would walk the castle corridors alone, her footsteps echoing on stone floors worn smooth by centuries of other queens, other women who had lived these same gilded, empty days. She would trail her fingers along the cold walls and feel like a ghost, already dead but somehow still walking. The gardens became her refuge. There, at least, things grew and changed and died and grew again, following some rhythm that felt true, that felt real. She would kneel in the soil, her fine dresses forgotten, and dig her hands into the earth, feeling the living pulse of it, the worms and roots and endless cycle of decay and renewal. "Your Majesty should not dirty herself so," her ladies would chide gently. But Guinevere needed to be dirty, needed to feel something real, even if it was only dirt under her fingernails. And then there was Lancelot. She had tried not to notice him, tried to see him as just another knight, just another piece of Arthur's court. But it was impossible, because when he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never been seen before. Not as a queen, not as a decorative object, but as a woman, as a person with thoughts and feelings and depths that no one else seemed to believe existed. She began to notice when he was near. Her body knew before her mind did, some animal awareness that made her skin tingle, made her breath catch. In the great hall during feasts, she could feel his presence like heat from a fire, even when he stood across the room. Her eyes would find him without her permission, and she would watch the way he moved, graceful and powerful, like water and stone made flesh. And she would see how carefully he avoided her, how he never stood too close, how his eyes would find her and then dart away, as if looking too long might burn him. And this, perversely, made her want more, made her want to break through that careful control, to make him admit what she knew, with bone-deep certainty, was true. He felt it too, this impossible thing. One afternoon in the garden, she was cutting roses when he appeared, sent by Arthur to deliver some message she immediately forgot. They stood there, him in his armor still dusty from the training yard, her with a rose in her hand, a thorn pressing into her thumb without her noticing, drawing a single drop of blood that fell, bright and red, onto the white petals. He saw the blood. His eyes darkened with something that was not quite concern, something deeper and more dangerous. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, gently taking the rose from her fingers and examining the small wound. The touch of his hand on hers was electric. Both of them froze. Time stretched thin as a spider's thread. She could feel his pulse through his fingertips, racing as fast as her own. She could smell the leather of his armor, the salt of his sweat, the indefinable scent that was just him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, every wall between them dissolved. "You're hurt," he said, and his voice was rough, barely controlled. "It's nothing," she whispered, but neither of them moved. They stood like that, hand in hand in the garden, the rose bleeding between them, and Guinevere felt more alive than she had in years. More herself. More real. It was Lancelot who pulled away first, stepping back as if burned, his face a mask of controlled agony. "Forgive me, my lady," he said, formal again, distant again. "I forgot myself." And he turned and walked away, his stride too fast, too rigid, a man barely holding himself together. Guinevere stood alone in the garden, her hand still tingling where he had touched her, the rose still bleeding in her palm. She should go inside. She should wash the blood away and forget this moment and return to being the perfect, untouchable queen. But she did not want to be perfect anymore. She did not want to be untouchable. She wanted to be known. She wanted to be loved, truly loved, not as a symbol but as a woman. She wanted to feel something real before she died, having felt nothing at all. And as she stood there, the sun warm on her face and the rose dripping crimson onto the stone path, she made a decision that she knew, even then, would change everything. She would not hide anymore. Not from him. Not from herself. The cost, whatever it was, would be worth it. Or so she told herself, there in the garden, not yet knowing what cost the heart can demand. Chapter 4: Crossing the Forbidden Line. There is a moment in every forbidden thing when we make the choice. Not the first choice, the small one, the one that seems harmless, but the real choice, the one where we step off the cliff and commit to the fall. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. The uncomfortable tension that arises when our actions contradict our beliefs, when who we think we are collides with what we are actually doing. The mind cannot hold this tension for long. It must resolve it somehow. And so we tell ourselves stories. We create justifications. We reframe the narrative until our actions seem not just acceptable, but inevitable, even righteous. This is destiny, we say. This is different. No one will be hurt. I deserve this. This love is pure, even if the world cannot understand it. The mind is a master storyteller when it wants something badly enough. And so Lancelot and Guinevere, two people who prided themselves on honor, on duty, on doing what was right, found ways to make the wrong thing feel like the only thing that made sense. This is how the line gets crossed. Not in one dramatic leap, but in 1,000 small steps, each one justified, each one rationalized, until you look back and realize you are standing somewhere you swore you would never go. Let us witness that crossing now. Let us understand it, not to judge it, but to recognize it. Because we have all crossed lines we swore we never would. We have all been human in the most complicated of ways. It began with letters. Small folded pieces of parchment, passed through trusted hands, hidden in books or beneath stones in the garden where only they would know to look. At first, the words were careful, coded, nothing that could be used as evidence if found. But gradually, the letters grew bolder, more honest, more desperate. Guinevere wrote of her loneliness, of feeling like a bird in a cage made of gold but still a cage. She wrote of how she felt when he was near, how the world gained color and dimension it did not have without him. She wrote things she had never spoken aloud, had barely let herself think, and in the writing, she felt like she was finally breathing. Lancelot wrote of his torment, of serving a king he loved while wanting what he could never have. He wrote of how he saw her in everything, in the dawn light, in the flash of a sword, in the stillness before battle. He wrote that he had tried to stop loving her and found it as impossible as stopping his own heartbeat. He wrote that he was sorry. Sorry for wanting her. Sorry for not being strong enough to stay away. But he did not stay away. They began to find moments. Secret moments. A few minutes alone in the chapel before dawn, kneeling side by side as if in prayer, their hands touching in the darkness where no one could see. A conversation in the hallway, standing too close, speaking too quietly, their words less important than the simple fact of nearness. Arthur noticed nothing. Or perhaps he chose to notice nothing. His trust in them both was absolute, unshakable. He loved Lancelot like a brother. He honored Guinevere as his queen. It would never occur to him that two people he held so dear could betray him. And in some terrible way, this made it worse. Because his innocence, his goodness, became the weapon that wounded him. The other knights began to whisper. Not openly, never openly. But in dark corners and over late-night drinks, the rumors started like sparks, small and quickly stamped out, but persistent. Agravain, Mordred, men who had always resented Lancelot's perfection, watched with hungry eyes, waiting for proof, for the moment when the golden night would finally fall. And then came the night that changed everything. It was high summer. The heat lay thick over Camelot like a blanket, making sleep impossible. Guinevere stood at her window, the casement thrown open, trying to catch any breath of cool air. The moon hung full and bright above the castle, turning everything to silver and shadow. And below, in the courtyard, she saw him. Lancelot stood alone, his face turned up toward her window. He had not planned to come. Had fought with himself for hours, pacing his quarters like a caged animal. But the pull was too strong. The need to see her, even from a distance, even for a moment, was more powerful than reason, than duty, than fear. Their eyes met across the distance, and without a word, without a sound, they understood. Tonight. It had to be tonight. If they did not cross this line now, the tension would kill them both. If they did not reach for each other now, they would spend the rest of their lives wondering what if, living half-lives, dying slowly from the inside out. The window was barred. Iron bars set deep into stone, meant to protect the queen from danger. But Lancelot looked at those bars and saw only one more obstacle between him and the thing his soul screamed for. He moved forward like a man in a dream, or a nightmare, no longer sure which. He gripped the bars. The metal was cold under his hands, solid and unyielding. A sensible man would have stopped there, would have seen it as a sign, as the universe telling him, this far, no further. But Lancelot was no longer sensible. He was a man possessed by love and longing and years of denial that had fermented into something stronger than any vow he had ever taken. He pulled. The bars resisted. But he was the strongest knight in the kingdom, and in that moment, fueled by something beyond strength, beyond the merely physical, he felt like he could tear the castle itself apart stone by stone if it stood between him and her. The metal groaned. His hands bled where the sharp edges cut into his palms, but he did not feel the pain. There was only the goal. Only her face in the window, her eyes wide, her hand pressed to her mouth, half in horror and half in something else, something wild and exultant. The bars bent. They snapped. They fell away. And Lancelot climbed through the window into her chamber, his hands leaving blood on the white stone, his breath ragged. His whole body trembling with the enormity of what he had just done. What he was about to do. Guinevere stood frozen, her nightgown pale in the moonlight, her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and the weight of everything unsaid, everything repressed, everything denied, hung between them like a living thing. "We cannot," she whispered, even as she took a step toward him. "I know," he said, his voice broken. "God help me, I know." Another step. His blood dripped onto her floor, dark spots on pale stone. "Arthur," she began. "I know," he said again. "I know, I know, I know." And then she was in his arms. And he was holding her like a drowning man holds a piece of driftwood. And their mouths found each other in the darkness, and every wall, every defense, every reason why they should not, crumbled to dust. This is the truth of forbidden love. In the moment of surrender, it feels like salvation, not sin. It feels like finally coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The guilt comes later. The consequences come later. But in that first instant of contact, there is only relief, only the rightness of it, only the sense that this is what it means to be alive. They did not speak. Words would have broken the spell, would have let in the reasons and the reality. They communicated in touches, in gasps, in the universal language of need and recognition, and souls crying out, "Yes. This. You." Later, much later, when they lay tangled together in her bed, the sheets stained with his blood from his hands, the moon setting beyond the broken window, reality began to creep back in like cold water. "What have we done?" Guinevere whispered, her head on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her cheek, still fast, still alive with what they had shared. Lancelot stared at the ceiling, his arms around her, and felt the full weight of his betrayal settle onto him like an iron cloak. Arthur's face rose in his mind. Arthur, who had trusted him, who had called him brother, who had given him everything. "We have ruined everything," he said quietly. But even as he said it, he tightened his hold on her, because the thought of letting go, of walking away, of never holding her again, was unbearable. More unbearable than guilt. More unbearable than dishonor. And this, perhaps, was the deepest tragedy. Not that they loved, but that they could not stop loving, even when love demanded too high a price. As dawn began to lighten the sky, Lancelot slipped from her bed, from her arms, from the room that smelled of roses and ruin. He climbed back through the broken window, his hands still bleeding, his soul torn in ways that might never heal. He did not look back. If he looked back, he would stay. If he stayed, there would be no pretending, no going back to the way things were. But he knew, and she knew, and perhaps some part of Arthur knew, though he would not let himself see it yet, everything had changed. The line had been crossed, and there was no road that led back to innocence. Only forward, into the darkness that waited. Chapter 5. The Double Melody of Sweetness and Guilt. There is a peculiar kind of existence that begins after the first transgression. A life split down the middle, where joy and shame occupy the same space. Where every moment of happiness is shadowed by the awareness of its wrongness. Where you are simultaneously more alive than you have ever been and dying inside from what that aliveness costs. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon, this cognitive dissonance taken to its extreme. The mind tries desperately to reconcile the contradiction, I am a good person versus, I am doing a harmful thing. And when these two truths cannot be reconciled, the mind fractures. Part of you learns to live in the moment, to take what joy you can. Another part keeps a ledger of sins, adding them up, knowing that eventually, the debt will come due. For Lancelot and Guinevere, the months that followed that first night were both the sweetest and the most torturous of their lives. They stole moments like thieves, knowing that each one deepened their betrayal, but unable to stop themselves. Because when you have tasted water after a lifetime of thirst, how do you go back to the desert? You do not. You cannot. And so you drink, and you hate yourself for drinking, and you drink again. The affair, once begun, developed its own rhythm, its own secret life. They learned the castle's blind spots, the hours when corridors were empty, the moments when Arthur's attention was elsewhere. They became masters of deception, of the careful lie, of the neutral expression that revealed nothing. It was easier than it should have been. Or perhaps that was the most damning thing of all. How naturally dishonesty came when protecting something you wanted to protect. They met in the garden at dawn, when the world was still wrapped in mist and the servants had not yet stirred. They would walk together, never touching where eyes might see, but close enough that their hands sometimes brushed, sending electricity through both of them. They spoke of small things, inconsequential things, because the real conversation was happening beneath the words, in glances and pauses and the magnetic pull of standing near someone you are not supposed to want. They met in the chapel late at night, kneeling side by side in the darkness. Their prayers twisted things now, asking forgiveness for sins they were still committing, still planned to commit again. The irony was not lost on either of them. They were praying to a God they were defying, in a sacred space they were desecrating, and yet the prayers felt real, felt necessary, because guilt needs somewhere to go, and God, they hoped, might understand what humans could not. And sometimes, when the risk was greatest and the need was strongest, Lancelot would return to her window, and she would let him in, and they would have a few stolen hours in the darkness, holding each other as if the world outside did not exist, as if consequences were a myth, as if love alone could justify anything. In those moments, Guinevere felt whole in a way she had never felt whole before. In Lancelot's arms, she was not a queen, not a political pawn, not a decorative object. She was simply herself, messy and real and deeply, desperately alive. He looked at her and saw her, truly saw her, and that seeing was a gift more precious than any crown. "When I am with you," she whispered one night, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest, "I remember who I am. Not who I am supposed to be, who I actually am." Lancelot kissed her forehead, his heart breaking and mending and breaking again all at once. "You are the bravest person I have ever known," he said, "and the most beautiful. Not because of your face, though you are beautiful, but because of your soul, because of the way you love, fierce and true and without reservation." She looked up at him, tears catching the candlelight. "Then why does this feel like dying?" He had no answer, because it did feel like dying. Every moment of joy was edged with the knowledge of what it was costing. Arthur's trust, their own integrity, the stability of a kingdom that depended on the king's belief in loyalty, in honor, in the sanctity of vows. And yet they could not stop. But the guilt grew like a living thing inside Lancelot, feeding on every smile he gave Arthur, every hand he shook, every time he sat at the round table and accepted the title of truest knight while knowing he was the falsest of them all. He began to volunteer for impossible quests, seeking death in the guise of heroism. He rode into battles he should not have survived, fought creatures that should have killed him, as if daring the universe to exact the punishment he deserved. But he always survived. His skill, or fate, or some cruel joke of God, always brought him back alive. And every time he returned, Arthur was there, beaming with pride, clasping him in an embrace that felt like daggers in Lancelot's heart. "What would I do without you?" Arthur would say, his voice warm with genuine affection. "You are my greatest knight, my truest friend." And Lancelot would smile and say the right words, and inside he would scream. Then came the quest for the Holy Grail. It was Arthur's great dream. To find the sacred cup that Christ had drunk from at the Last Supper, the vessel that held the blood of God Himself. The quest was announced with great ceremony. All the knights would ride out, seeking the Grail in whatever far corners of the earth it might be hidden. And the one pure enough, noble enough, perfect enough, would be granted the vision of it. Lancelot rode out with hope burning in his chest. This would be his redemption. He would find the Grail. God would forgive him. And perhaps, finally, he could forgive himself. But the quest became a nightmare. He wandered for months through enchanted forests and across desolate plains. He faced trials that tested not his strength but his soul. And at every turn, he failed. Doors that should have opened remained closed. Visions that should have been granted were withheld. He knelt in dark churches and empty fields and begged God to show him the Grail, to give him this one thing, this proof that he was not entirely lost. But the only vision he received was of Guinevere, her face shimmering before him like a ghost, her voice whispering, "Come back to me. Come back." One night, half mad with despair, he stumbled into a hermit's cave. The old man took one look at him and knew. "You seek the Grail," the hermit said, his voice like wind through dead leaves. "Yes," Lancelot said. "I must find it. I must." The hermit shook his head slowly. "The Grail is not for you, Sir Knight. You are not pure. Your heart is divided. You love what you should not love. You have betrayed the trust of the one who loved you most." Lancelot sank to his knees. "I know," he whispered. "God help me, I know. But I cannot stop. I have tried. I have prayed. I have fought myself until there is nothing left to fight with. And still, I love her. Still, I want her. What am I to do?" The hermit looked at him with something like pity. "There is no easy answer," he said. "Love is not always holy. Sometimes it is the thing that destroys us. You must choose, Knight. The woman or the Grail. You cannot have both." Lancelot closed his eyes. He thought of Guinevere. Her laugh. Her touch. The way she looked at him as if he were the answer to every question she had ever asked. He thought of a life without her, and it was like imagining a life without breath, without light, without meaning. "Then I am damned," he said quietly. The hermit said nothing. There was nothing to say. Lancelot returned to Camelot weeks later, empty-handed, hollowed out. Arthur welcomed him back with open arms, disappointed that the Grail had not been found but proud that his knight had returned safely. That night, Lancelot went to Guinevere's chambers. She saw his face and knew. "You did not find it," she said softly. "No," he said. "I am not worthy." She took his face in her hands. "You are worthy to me," she said. "You are everything to me." And he held her, and he wept, because her love was both his salvation and his damnation, and he could not tell anymore where one ended and the other began. The Grail was found, eventually. Not by Lancelot, but by his son, Galahad, born of another woman long ago, a boy raised pure and perfect and untouched by the complications that had destroyed his father. Galahad saw the Grail and was taken up into heaven, perfected, completed, leaving this world behind. When Lancelot heard the news, he stood alone in the courtyard and looked up at the sky where his son had gone, and he felt a grief so profound it had no name. His son had achieved what he could not. His son was pure where he was tainted. His son had been loved by God where he was abandoned. And yet, even in that moment of ultimate failure, when he closed his eyes, it was Guinevere's face he saw. Not heaven, not God, not redemption. Just her. And he knew, with terrible clarity, that he would choose her again, 1,000 times, even knowing what it cost, even knowing how it would end. Because this was love, not the pure, holy love the story spoke of, but the messy, human, devastating love that asks you to give up everything, including yourself. And he had already given it. There was nothing left to hold back. Chapter 6: The Price of Truth. Secrets are like seeds planted in dark soil. They grow roots deep and tangled, spreading through the foundation of everything built above them. And when they finally break the surface, when truth comes into the light, the destruction is not clean. It is catastrophic. Psychologists who study trauma understand this well. The revelation of a long-held secret does not just hurt in the moment. It retrospectively poisons every memory, every interaction, every moment of trust that came before. The betrayed person must go back through time, rewriting their entire history, asking, was any of it real? Did they ever truly love me? How long was I the fool? This is the secondary wound of betrayal. Not just the act itself, but the contamination of everything that came before. The loss of the past as well as the future. For Arthur, the truth would come like an earthquake, shaking the very foundation of his world. Because he had built his entire reign on trust, on the belief that good men could create a good world, on the certainty that those he loved would never, could never, betray him. He was wrong. And the wrongness would kill everything he had built. Mordred had waited years for this moment. Born of Arthur's own sin, the product of an unknowing night of incest, Mordred was a walking reminder that even the noblest king could fall. He had grown up in shadow, watching Lancelot bask in Arthur's love while he, the king's own blood, was kept at arm's length, never fully trusted, never fully embraced. Bitterness had roots in him deep as oak trees, and bitterness, given time, grows into something else. Something darker. Something that watches and waits for the perfect moment to strike. He had suspected for years. Had watched the way Lancelot and Guinevere looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. Had noted the patterns, Lancelot's late-night disappearances, Guinevere's glowing face the mornings after, Arthur's willful blindness to what was happening in his own house. But suspicion was not proof, and Mordred needed proof. He gathered others to his cause. Agravain, who had always envied Lancelot's perfection. Other knights who felt overlooked, undervalued, hungry for the chance to bring the golden boy down. They watched. They waited. They planned. And one night, they got their chance. Arthur was away, called to the border on some minor dispute that required the king's presence. Lancelot, believing the castle safe, believing the pattern so established as to be invisible, went to Guinevere's chambers. He climbed through the window he had broken years ago, the one that had been quietly repaired but left deliberately weak, a doorway they pretended did not exist. Mordred and his men waited until they were certain. Waited until there could be no doubt, no alternative explanation. And then they moved. The pounding on Guinevere's door was like thunder, violent and sudden and world-ending. Open in the name of the king. Agravain's voice, sharp with triumph. We know you are in there, Lancelot. We know what you have done. Inside the chamber, time stopped. Lancelot and Guinevere stared at each other, all color draining from their faces. This was the moment they had always known would come, had tried not to imagine, had hoped against hope would never arrive. You must go, Guinevere whispered, her voice shaking. The window, quickly, before they. I will not leave you, Lancelot said, already reaching for his sword, his mind shifting into the cold clarity of battle. I will not let them hurt you. If you fight them, it will be treason, she said, tears streaming down her face. They will execute you. They will execute us both. The pounding grew louder. The door shuddered on its hinges. Lancelot looked at her, his queen, his love, his doom, and made a choice that was no choice at all. He would die before he let them take her. He would kill before he let them hurt her. Even if it meant betraying Arthur one final, irreversible time. Stand back, he told her, his voice cold as winter iron. the door burst open. 12 knights flooded in, swords drawn, faces flushed with righteousness and barely concealed glee. They had caught him. Finally, they had caught him. What happened next was butchery. Lancelot, unarmed except for his sword, still half-dressed, fought like a man possessed. He was the greatest warrior of his age, and even caught off guard, even outnumbered, he was death itself. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat, his blade singing, blood arcing through the air in black ribbons in the dim light. Agravain fell first, his throat opened, his eyes wide with surprise that even in this moment, Lancelot was better. Others followed. The chamber became a nightmare of screaming and steel and the copper-thick smell of blood. Guinevere pressed herself against the wall, her hands over her mouth, watching the man she loved kill for her, die for her, destroy everything for her. When it was over, when the last of the knights lay dead or dying on her floor, Lancelot stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood that was theirs and his sword dripping red onto the stones. Among the dead were Gareth and Gaheris, two of Gawain's brothers. Young men, good men, men who had likely been forced into this, who had not wanted to be here, who had died because they were in the way. Lancelot looked down at them and felt something inside him break that would never be repaired. "I have killed innocents," he whispered. "God forgive me. They were just boys." Guinevere came to him, stepping over bodies, slipping in blood, and took his face in her hands. "You had no choice," she said, but her voice was hollow. They both knew that was not true. They had made 1,000 choices that led to this moment. "You must go," she said again. "Now, before more come. Get your men. Get your knights. Prepare for what comes next." "I will not leave you to face this alone," he said. "You must," she said, and her voice was suddenly stronger, queenly again. "If you stay, they will kill you where you stand. If you go, you might be able to save me later. Go. I command it." So he went, climbed back through the window, leaving bloody handprints on the stone, and disappeared into the night like a ghost, like the man he used to be, the perfect knight, already dead and just not buried yet. Guards found Guinevere minutes later, standing in her ruined chamber surrounded by corpses, her nightgown stained with blood, her eyes dry and distant. They arrested her without ceremony, bound her hands, led her away to the dungeons beneath the castle, the same dungeons where traitors were kept before execution. Word was sent to Arthur. The king returned 3 days later, riding hard, his heart filled with dread because he knew, somehow he knew, that everything had changed. They told him in his chambers, Mordred speaking with false sympathy dripping from every word. Told him that his queen and his greatest knight had betrayed him. Told him that the rumors had been true all along. Told him what everyone else had apparently seen while he, trusting fool, had been blind. Arthur listened in silence. His face showed nothing. But inside, the world was ending. Every memory was being rewritten. Every moment of joy poisoned. He thought of all the times he had clasped Lancelot's shoulder, called him brother, trusted him with everything. He thought of Guinevere in his bed, in his life, wearing his crown. And he wondered how long they had been laughing at him behind his back. They had not been laughing. They had been drowning in guilt. But Arthur would never know that. All he could feel was the betrayal, complete and crushing, the foundation of his life crumbling beneath him. "What does the law say?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Mordred's smile was thin and sharp. "The law is clear, my lord. The penalty for treason is death. The penalty for adultery, for a queen, is death by burning." Arthur closed his eyes. The law, his law, the justice he had built this kingdom upon. It demanded her death. It demanded he execute the woman he had loved, the woman who had worn his ring and shared his bed and stood beside him through everything. "Prepare the pyre," he said, and his voice broke on the words. Three days later, they brought Guinevere out into the courtyard. The pyre stood ready, wood stacked high, the stake in the center waiting. The entire court was forced to watch. Justice must be public. Justice must be seen. Arthur stood on a balcony, far enough away that he did not have to see her face clearly, close enough that there was no escaping what he was about to do. His hands gripped the stone rail until they were white. His jaw was clenched so hard it ached. "Do it," he told himself. "She betrayed you. She made a fool of you. She deserves this." But another voice, quieter, asked, "Does she? Does anyone deserve to burn?" They tied Guinevere to the stake. Her hair, that beautiful hair, hung loose around her face. She did not cry, did not beg. She stood straight, accepting, a queen even now, even at the end. The torch was lit. And then, like something out of a fever dream, like fate itself intervening, Lancelot came. He rode out of the morning mist with his knights behind him, 30 men against the hundreds gathered in the courtyard, and it did not matter. He was a storm, a force of nature, cutting through anyone who stood between him and her. He reached the pyre just as the flames began to lick at the wood. With one sweep of his sword, he cut her bonds. He pulled her onto his horse, and she wrapped her arms around him, and for one brief moment, the world was just them, just two people who loved each other, who had destroyed everything for each other, who would keep destroying until there was nothing left. And then they rode away, leaving behind carnage and chaos and a king standing on a balcony, watching the only two people he had ever truly loved disappear into the mist together. Arthur stood there long after they were gone. The courtyard was clearing. People were tending to the wounded. The pyre still smoldered, unused. And Arthur realized, with a clarity that was almost physical in its pain, that he would have to hunt them. That he would have to destroy them. Not because he wanted to, but because he was the king. Because the law demanded it. Because if he let this betrayal stand, his entire kingdom would crumble. So he would make war on the people he loved. He would become the villain in their story. He would do what kings do when their hearts break. Chapter 7. The Kingdom Crumbles. There is a particular species of grief that comes not from death, but from the death of what could have been. The loss of a future you believed in. The shattering of a dream you built your entire life around. Arthur had dreamed of Camelot as a place where might served right, where the strong protected the weak, where men could transcend their base natures and become something better. He had dreamed of a round table where no man sat higher than another, where equality and honor were not just ideals but lived realities. And now that dream was burning. Psychologists speak of shattered assumptions, the way trauma forces us to rebuild our entire understanding of the world. When something we believe to be absolutely true turns out to be false, we do not just lose that one thing. We lose the framework that held everything else in place. If this could happen, we think, then anything could happen. If these people could betray me, then no one is trustworthy. If this foundation could crack, then nothing is solid. Arthur was experiencing the complete collapse of his world. And in that collapse, in that grief so profound it had no bottom, he would make the choice that all grieving people must eventually make, to let the grief destroy everything, or to try, somehow, to build something from the ruins. He chose destruction. Not because he wanted to, but because he was human. And humans, when wounded deeply enough, sometimes cannot help but wound in return. Civil war came to Camelot like a fever, sudden and consuming. The round table, that perfect circle of fellowship, shattered into fragments, each knight choosing a side, brother against brother, friend against friend. Some rode with Arthur, believing in the law, in justice, in the necessity of punishing betrayal no matter how much it hurt. Others rode with Lancelot, believing that love, even forbidden love, was worth defending, that the heart's truth mattered more than the law's rigid pronouncements. but most simply rode because they had to choose, and in choosing, they tore the kingdom apart. Lancelot fled with Guinevere to his own lands across the sea, to a castle called Joyous Gard, which had never known anything but happiness until now. He gathered his loyal knights around him, men who loved him more than they loved their king, and he prepared for the siege he knew was coming. Guinevere watched him from the castle windows, saw him training in the courtyard, his movements as graceful as ever but somehow different now, heavier, as if he carried the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders. Which, in a way, he did. "Do you regret it?" she asked him one night, as they lay together in the darkness, their stolen moments no longer stolen but somehow even more bitter for being allowed. Lancelot was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind howled like all the ghosts of all the men who would soon die because of them. "I regret the pain," he said finally. "I regret Arthur's suffering. I regret the kingdom falling. I regret every good man who will die in this war. But you?" He turned to her, his hand finding her face in the darkness. "You, I cannot regret. Even now. Even knowing what it cost. I cannot regret loving you." She wept then, her tears hot against his palm. Because she felt the same. Because love, real love, does not bow to reason. It does not calculate costs. It simply is, burning like a star, indifferent to the destruction in its wake. Arthur arrived with his army 3 weeks later. Thousands of men, the best knights of Britain, the full might of the realm. They surrounded Joyous Gard like a noose tightening, and the siege began. It lasted months. Months of arrows falling like rain. Months of men dying on both sides, screaming for their mothers, bleeding out in the mud, all for a love they did not understand, a betrayal they had no part in. Months of Arthur standing in his command tent, staring at maps, planning strategies to destroy the man he had once called brother. Gawain was with him. Gawain, whose brothers Gareth and Gaheris had died in Lancelot's desperate escape. Gawain, who had loved Lancelot once, who had defended him against all accusations, who now hated him with the fury of love turned to poison. "We should burn them out," Gawain said, his voice hard as stone. "Starve them. Show no mercy. They showed my brothers no mercy." Arthur looked at his nephew, this good man twisted by grief into something cruel, and saw himself reflected there. This was what they had all become. Shadows of who they used to be. "They were accidents," Arthur said quietly. "Lancelot did not mean to kill them." "He killed them nonetheless," Gawain roared. "He killed them while fleeing his treachery. He killed them to protect his whore." "Careful," Arthur said, and his voice was ice. "She is still my wife. She is still the queen." The absurdity of it hung in the air between them. The queen who was no longer queen. The wife who was no longer wife. The labels that still existed even as the reality had dissolved. Finally, the Pope himself intervened. Word had reached Rome of the kingdom tearing itself apart, of Christian knights slaughtering each other over a love affair. The Holy Father sent a decree: the siege must end. Guinevere must be returned to Arthur. And if Lancelot valued his immortal soul, he would comply. Lancelot read the decree in his chambers, his hands shaking. Beside him, Guinevere stared at the parchment as if it were a death sentence. "I will not give you back," Lancelot said, his voice raw. "I do not care what Rome says. I do not care what God says. You are mine. You chose me." Guinevere took his face in her hands, and her expression was infinitely sad, infinitely weary. "Listen to what you are saying," she whispered. "You sound like Mordred, like the villains in the stories. Love has made us monsters, Lancelot. Look at what we have done. Look at how many have died." "I know," he said, and tears ran down his face, the first tears he had shed since all of this began. "I know. But I cannot let you go. Tell me I do not have to let you go." She kissed him, soft and final. "You have to let me go," she said. "Because if you do not, this war will never end. Every death from this moment forward will be on our heads. Is that the love you want? Built on a mountain of corpses." So it was agreed. Guinevere would return to Arthur. Lancelot would withdraw to his lands. The siege would end. And perhaps, some semblance of peace could be found. The day of the exchange was grey and cold, the sky heavy with unshed rain. Lancelot rode out with Guinevere seated before him on his horse, his arms around her one last time. The armies watched in silence, thousands of men bearing witness to the end of the greatest love and the greatest betrayal their age had known. At the midpoint between the two camps, Lancelot stopped. Arthur waited there on his own horse, his face carefully blank, his eyes avoiding Guinevere entirely. Lancelot helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. For a moment, they stood close enough that only they could hear each other speak. "I love you," he whispered. "I will love you until the stars go dark." "And I you," she said, "in this life and whatever comes after." Then she turned and walked toward Arthur, her steps slow, her back straight, every inch a queen despite everything. Arthur dismounted and offered her his hand, still not looking at her face, and helped her onto her own horse. Lancelot and Arthur faced each other across 10 feet of muddy ground. Once, they had been closer than brothers. Once, they had believed in the same dream. Once, they had loved each other with a pure, uncomplicated love of men who have fought side by side and bled together. Now, there was only wreckage between them. "I am sorry," Lancelot said, his voice breaking. "Arthur, I am so sorry. If I could undo it, if I could take it back." "But you cannot," Arthur said, and his voice was tired, so tired. "You cannot take it back. It is done. And we must all live with what was done." He turned his horse and began to ride away, Guinevere following, not looking back, because if she looked back, she would lose what little strength she had left. Lancelot stood in the mud and watched them go, his whole body shaking with the effort of not calling out, not running after them, not trying to steal one more moment of what he had already lost. And then the rain began to fall, and he turned and rode back to his men, back to the castle, back to a life that would never again hold any joy. But the peace did not last. It could not last. Because Gawain's grief was too great, his need for vengeance too consuming. He challenged Lancelot to single combat, again and again, refusing to let the matter rest. And Arthur, bound by honor and by Gawain's fury, was forced to make war on Lancelot once more. They met on the field, Lancelot and Gawain, two of the greatest warriors of their age, and they fought with a savagery born of love turned to hate. Lancelot, who did not want to fight, who begged Gawain to stop, who held back his full strength because he could not bear to kill another man he loved. Gawain, who fought like a man possessed, who screamed his brothers' names with every blow, who wanted blood and death and nothing less. In the end, Lancelot struck the blow that would prove fatal, though Gawain would linger for weeks before dying. He stood over his former friend, his sword bloody, and felt something inside him die as well. "I am sorry," he said again, to Gawain, to Arthur, to the sky itself. "I am sorry. I am sorry." But sorry was not enough. It had never been enough. While Arthur was away, making war on Lancelot, Mordred seized his chance. He declared Arthur dead, claimed the throne, and even tried to force Guinevere to marry him, to legitimize his rule through her. Guinevere, locked in the Tower of London, sent word to Arthur. "Come back," the message said. "Your kingdom is being stolen. Everything you built is falling." Arthur abandoned the war against Lancelot and rushed back to Britain. And there, on the field of Camlan, father and son met in battle. The remnants of the Round Table, the last knight standing, fought and died in the mud while Arthur and Mordred circled each other, two sides of the same coin, two products of the same flawed world. Arthur killed Mordred. But not before Mordred dealt him a mortal wound, a spear thrust through the ribs that would not heal. As Arthur lay dying on the battlefield, surrounded by the corpses of his knights, his dream, his entire life's work, he thought of Guinevere, of Lancelot, of how love and trust and all the best parts of being human could somehow lead to this, a field of the dead, a kingdom in ruins, a king bleeding out with no heir, no future, no hope. Was it worth it? He whispered to the sky, to God, to anyone who might be listening. No answer came. They carried him to a boat. Some say he was taken to Avalon to be healed. Others say he simply died, as all men die, king and peasant alike. But Camelot was finished. The round table was broken. The dream was over. And somewhere across the sea, Lancelot heard the news and knew that he had destroyed everything he had ever loved. Chapter 8: The Final Farewell. There is a kind of goodbye that happens not when someone dies, but when you both realize you must live separate lives, must walk separate paths, even though every fiber of your being wants to stay. This goodbye is slower than death. More painful, in some ways, because you carry it with you every day, the knowledge that they are still breathing somewhere in the world, still waking and sleeping and living, just not with you. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss. The grief without closure. The ending without a body to bury. It is the loss of a future that almost was, the death of a possibility rather than a person. And it can haunt a life in ways that death itself sometimes cannot. For Lancelot and Guinevere, the final parting was not a single moment but a slow dissolution, like salt disappearing into water. They had to let each other go piece by piece, memory by memory, until what remained was only the echo of what had been. But echoes, as anyone who has lost deeply knows, can be loud enough to fill a lifetime. When Guinevere heard of Arthur's death, she did not cry. She stood in the chamber where she had been kept, half prisoner, half queen, and felt something inside her go very still and very cold. Arthur was dead. The man she had married, the man she had betrayed, the man who had loved her in his way and whom she had loved in hers, inadequately perhaps, but truly nonetheless. He was gone. And with him went any possibility of redemption, of explanation, of ever making him understand that she had never meant to hurt him. Three days later, she left the court without ceremony, without fanfare. She simply walked out, dressed in simple clothes, her hair covered, anonymous for the first time in decades. No one stopped her. The kingdom was in chaos. There was no king, no clear succession, no one to care what one widow did or where she went. She walked to a convent 3 days' journey from Camelot, a small house of sisters perched on a windswept hill, far from everything she had known. She knocked on the wooden door and asked for sanctuary. The Mother Superior took one look at her and knew, somehow, who she was, what she had done, what she carried. But she asked no questions. She simply opened the door. "Welcome, daughter," she said. "You are safe here." Guinevere took the veil, cut her beautiful hair until it was short as a boy's, put on the rough wool habit that chafed her skin, so different from the silk she had worn for years. She learned to pray in the cold chapel before dawn. She learned to work in the garden, her hands in the soil again, like when she had been a girl. She learned to live with silence. The other sisters did not know who she was, or if they knew, they did not speak of it. Here, there were no queens, no sinners, no saints. Only women trying to find some measure of peace before the darkness came for them too. And slowly, in that place of stone and prayer and endless quiet, Guinevere began to breathe again. Lancelot, when he heard of Arthur's death, fell to his knees in his chapel and wept until he had no tears left. He had killed the man he loved most in the world. Not with a sword, but with betrayal, with love turned weapon. Arthur had died making war on him, died without ever forgiving him, died believing himself a fool. The guilt was a living thing inside Lancelot, devouring him from within. He could not eat, could not sleep without nightmares of Arthur's face, of Gawain dying in the mud, of all the men whose blood stained his hands. His knights watched him waste away and did not know how to help. A man could not fight grief, could not defeat it in combat, could only endure it or be destroyed by it. One morning, Lancelot rose before dawn and began to ride. He did not tell anyone where he was going. He simply left, as Guinevere had left, seeking something he could not name, some place where the weight might be lighter, where the ghosts might speak more quietly. He rode for days, through forests and across rivers, past villages where people whispered as he passed, recognizing the broken knight, the fallen hero, the man who had destroyed Camelot. He did not stop, did not eat, did not rest until exhaustion pulled him from his horse. And somehow, whether by chance or fate or the cruel humor of God, his path led him to the same hill, the same convent, where Guinevere had taken refuge. He arrived at sunset, the sky bleeding red and gold behind the grey stone walls. He dismounted and stood before the gate, his hands shaking, knowing somehow, feeling with certainty, that she was here, that she was close, that if he knocked, he might see her again. His hand raised to knock. And then it fell. Because he knew, with a clarity that was almost divine, that seeing her would be wrong, that they had caused enough damage, that the only gift he could give her now, the only true act of love, was to leave her in peace. But he could not leave entirely. Not yet. He found a monastery 2 miles down the valley, a house of monks who took him in without question, gave him a cell and a simple robe and asked only that he work and pray and seek whatever he had come seeking. He became a monk. Lancelot, the greatest knight of the age, took vows of poverty and chastity and obedience. He spent his days in labor, digging in the garden, copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, his warrior's hands learning gentleness at last. And every day, he would walk to the top of the hill and look toward the convent where he knew she lived, and he would pray for her. Pray that she was well. Pray that she had found peace. Pray that somehow, God would forgive them both for loving each other so badly, so destructively, so completely. Two years passed this way. 2 years of silence and separation and slow, agonizing healing that was not really healing but just learning to live with wounds that would never fully close. And then, one day, a messenger came to the monastery with news. The queen had asked to see Sir Lancelot. She was dying. Lancelot's blood turned to ice. He ran from the monastery, his monk's robes flapping around him, his breath ragged, fear and hope and grief all tangled in his chest. He had stayed away to give her peace. But if she was dying, if this was the last chance. The Mother Superior met him at the convent gate. Her face was grave. She is not dying, the woman said gently, but she is ill, and she asked for you. Or rather, she asked that a message be sent. She wants to see you. One last time. They led him to a small room, bare except for a narrow bed and a crucifix on the wall. And there, propped against thin pillows, was Guinevere. She was thin. So thin. Her face, once so beautiful, was worn now, lined with years and grief. Her hair, growing back beneath her veil, was streaked with gray. But her eyes were still hers, still the eyes that had met his across a crowded hall a lifetime ago and changed everything. They stood looking at each other, and all the words that should have been said dissolved on their tongues. Lancelot, she said finally, and her voice was rough from disuse, from hours spent in silence. Guinevere, he said, and it was the first time he had spoken her name aloud in 2 years. He moved to kneel beside her bed, to take her hand, but she raised her own hand to stop him. "No," she said gently. "Do not touch me. If you touch me, I will not be able to say what I need to say." So he stood, his hands at his sides, and he waited. I have thought about you every day, she said. Every single day. I have prayed for you. Prayed for your soul. Prayed that you would find some peace. And I need to know, before I die, before this life ends, have you found any? Lancelot's eyes filled with tears. No, he said honestly. I do not think I ever will. Not in this life. She nodded slowly, as if this was what she had expected. Neither have I, she said. The guilt lives in me like a second heart, always beating, always reminding me. But I have learned something, here in this place. What? He asked. That forgiveness is possible, she said. Not from Arthur. He is gone, beyond our reach. Not from the world. The world will never forgive us. But from ourselves. From God. I have learned that we can be sorry and still have loved. That we can regret the pain we caused and still hold precious what we had. That love, even destructive love, even sinful love, is still love. Lancelot sank to his knees then, not to reach for her but because his legs would no longer hold him. I loved you, he said, his voice breaking. I love you still. And I am sorry. For everything. For all of it. But I cannot regret you. Even now, knowing what it cost, I cannot regret loving you. Guinevere smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile he had ever seen. Good, she said softly. Do not regret me. Remember me. And when you pray, pray that we will meet again, in some place where there are no vows, no crowns, no duties. Where we are just two souls who recognized each other. And maybe there, we can love each other the way we were always meant to. Cleanly. Simply. Without destroying everything around us. Will I see you again? He asked. Before. She shook her head. No, she said. I am sending you away now. And I ask you, as the last thing you will ever do for me, to go. To leave. To not come back. Let this be our ending. Clean. Clear. A choice made with open eyes. He wanted to argue. Wanted to beg. Wanted to stay by her side until death took her, so that she would not be alone, so that he could hold her hand one last time. But he had learned, in 2 years of prayer and penance, what love sometimes requires. And so he stood. He bowed his head. He spoke the only words left to say. Goodbye, my queen. My love. My heart. Goodbye, my night, she said. My sin. My salvation. And he turned and walked away, each step harder than the last, knowing he would never see her again in this life, knowing that this was right even though it felt like dying. At the door, he paused and looked back one last time. She was watching him, her hand raised in farewell, tears streaming down her face. And then he stepped through the door, and she was gone. Chapter 9: The Reunion of Souls. There is a question that haunts everyone who has loved and lost. Will we meet again? Is there something beyond this life where the broken can be made whole, where the separated can find each other, where love gets a second chance? We cannot know the answer. Not truly. Not with the certainty we crave. But we can hope. And hope, fragile as it is, can be enough to carry us through the darkest hours. For Lancelot and Guinevere, the hope of reunion was all they had left. The hope that death was not an ending but a doorway. That somewhere, somehow, they would stand together again without shame, without guilt, without the weight of a kingdom on their shoulders. This is the final chapter, not of their lives, but of their love. And like all true endings, it is also a beginning. Guinevere died on a spring morning, 6 weeks after sending Lancelot away. The apple trees outside the convent were in bloom, their branches heavy with white flowers that fell like snow whenever the wind stirred. She died quietly, in her sleep, her face peaceful, her hands folded over her chest in the position of prayer. The sisters washed her body and dressed her in fresh robes. They sang her soul to heaven with voices like bells. They buried her in the small cemetery behind the convent, beneath an apple tree, with only a simple stone to mark the place. No mention of her being a queen. No record of her sins. Just her name and the dates of her life, as if she had been anyone, as if her story had not shaken a kingdom to its foundations. Word reached Lancelot 3 days later. He was in the monastery garden when the messenger arrived, his hands deep in the soil, planting seeds for a harvest he would never see. When he heard, when the words "she is gone" reached his ears, something inside him simply stopped. He did not weep. He had no tears left. He simply stood, brushed the dirt from his hands, and began to walk. The other monks watched him go and did not try to stop him. They knew. Somehow, they all knew. Lancelot walked the 2 miles to the convent through the spring morning, the world impossibly beautiful around him, birds singing, flowers blooming, the earth celebrating life while his heart held only death. The Mother Superior was waiting at the gate when he arrived, as if she had known he would come. "I want to see her," he said. "She is already buried," the woman said gently. Then show me where. She led him through the convent, through the cloisters where Guinevere had walked every day, through the chapel where she had prayed, through the garden where she had worked the soil with her own hands, trying to grow something pure from her stained life. The grave was in the far corner of the cemetery, beneath the apple tree, just as they had told him. Fresh earth, new stone, and all around, those white petals falling, like blessings or tears from heaven itself. Lancelot knelt beside the grave and placed his hand on the earth above her. I am here, he whispered. I came. I am sorry it took so long. The wind moved through the apple blossoms, and for a moment, he could swear he heard her voice in it, could swear she was saying, I know. It is all right. He stayed there all day, kneeling on the earth, his hand on her grave, speaking to her in whispers. He told her everything he had never said. About the nights he had lain awake thinking of her. About the times he had walked to the hilltop just to look toward where she slept. About how she had been his first thought every morning and his last thought every night, a constant presence even in absence. I tried to stop loving you, he said. God knows I tried. I thought if I prayed hard enough, if I punished myself enough, if I gave up everything that made me who I was, maybe the love would finally die. But it never did. It only grew quieter. It went underground, like roots in winter. But it never died. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lancelot felt something shift inside him. Not healing, exactly, but a kind of acceptance. She was gone. This chapter was closed. And he was still here, still breathing, still carrying this love that had defined and destroyed his life. I will see you again, he said, his voice stronger now, more certain. I do not know where. I do not know when. But I will find you. In whatever place souls go when they are done with this world, I will find you. And there, my love, we will finally be free. He returned to the monastery that night, and the monks saw immediately that something had changed in him. He was lighter somehow. Still sad, still broken, but no longer drowning. He had released something, or it had released him. Lancelot lived for 6 more weeks. In that time, he worked harder than ever, as if trying to pack a lifetime of penance into those final days. He rose before dawn and prayed until his knees ached. He fasted until his body was thin as a shadow. He sought out the hardest labor, the most menial tasks, serving others as he had once been served. The other monks worried, tried to make him rest, tried to make him eat. But he smiled at their concern and said, Do not worry for me, brothers. I am finishing something. And when it is done, I will rest. I promise. "6 weeks to the day after Guinevere's death, Lancelot asked permission to visit her grave one last time. The abbot granted it, though he was concerned by how weak Lancelot had become, how his once powerful body had wasted to almost nothing. "Do you want someone to accompany you?" the abbot asked. "No," Lancelot said gently. "This is something I need to do alone." He walked to the convent in the early morning, the world still gray with pre-dawn light. The apple tree was heavy with fruit now, green and promising, life continuing its endless cycle. He knelt beside her grave, in the exact spot he had knelt before, and he laid down on the earth above her, his cheek pressed to the soil, his hand reaching down as if he could touch her through the layers of earth and time. "I am coming, my love," he whispered. "Wait for me. Just a little longer. I am coming." And there, as the sun rose and painted the world gold, Lancelot closed his eyes and let go. The monks found him at midday, lying peacefully on Guinevere's grave, his face turned toward the sky, a slight smile on his lips. He had simply stopped breathing, as if his soul had decided, finally, that its work here was done. They buried him beside her. Not in the monastery grounds, but here, beneath the apple tree, because even the holy brothers understood that some loves transcend doctrine, transcend rules, transcend even death itself. Two graves, side by side. A queen and a knight. Buried in unmarked earth, forgotten by the world, but together at last. And some say, on spring mornings when the apple blossoms fall like snow, you can see them walking together in the garden. Not as they were in life, weighted with guilt and sorrow and impossible choices, but as they were always meant to be. Simply two souls who recognized each other, who loved each other, who found, in the end, the peace that had eluded them in life. The story does not say if they were forgiven. By God, by Arthur, by history. Perhaps forgiveness is not the point. Perhaps the point is that they loved, truly and deeply, even when that love was impossible. Even when it cost everything. And perhaps, in some realm beyond our understanding, love like that is its own redemption. And so, dear dreamer, we come to the end of this ancient story. A story that has been told and retold for nearly 1,000 years, because something in it speaks to the deepest parts of the human heart. Perhaps you are lying here in the darkness, thinking of someone you loved and lost. someone you chose or could not choose. Someone who changed you, who marked you, who lives in your memory like a ghost that will not rest. Perhaps you are carrying guilt for choices you made, for promises you broke, for the distance between who you want to be and who you actually are. Or perhaps you are simply tired. Tired of trying to be perfect. Tired of holding yourself to impossible standards. Tired of the weight of expectation and duty and all the roles you play that never quite feel like you. If any of this resonates, know this: you are not alone. Lancelot and Guinevere's story has survived a millennium because it is our story. All of us. The story of loving imperfectly, of choosing wrongly and rightly in the same breath, of being human in all its complicated, contradictory glory. There is no lesson here about what you should do. Love is too complex for simple answers. Hearts are too wild for easy rules. But there is something to be learned about compassion. About understanding that people can be good and still fail. That love can be real and still be wrong. That we are all doing our best in an impossible world, and sometimes our best is not enough, and that is heartbreaking, but it is also okay. Forgive yourself. For the mistakes you made. For the people you hurt. For the perfect life you thought you would live but did not. Forgive yourself, not because what you did was right, but because you are human, and humans deserve grace, especially from themselves. And if you loved someone you should not have loved, or wanted something you could not have, or broke something you cannot fix, know that you are not condemned. You are not beyond redemption. You are simply a person who felt deeply in a world that often asks us to feel nothing at all. Let tonight be a release. Let this story carry away some of the weight you have been holding. Let yourself imagine, just for a moment, that somewhere beyond this life, all the broken things are made whole. All the separated are reunited. All the love we could not fully express here gets its chance to bloom without fear, without shame, without cost. Rest now, dear traveler. Let your breath slow. Let your body soften into the darkness. You have journeyed with Lancelot and Guinevere through joy and sorrow, through passion and guilt, through life and death and the hope of something beyond. And now, their story told, you can let it go. Let it drift away on the tide of sleep. Let yourself be held by the gentle darkness. Tomorrow is a new day, but tonight, you need only rest. Sleep well. You are loved. You are forgiven. You are enough.